Welcome, everybody. We do a teaching related to Shabbat HaChodesh to prepare us for the sit today. And the theme is that we celebrate freedom even before it arrives. This coming Shabbat will be Rosh Chodesh, and either in anticipation of the new moon or at the new moon, there's a special reading from Exodus 12 that helps prepare us for Passover. And that's what we'll be looking at today. I wanted to begin with this long journey from slavery to freedom, just as High Holidays doesn't start on Rosh Hashanah, but with preparation of Elul. There's a lot of preparation before Passover, the special Sabbaths, and of course, the physical preparation of ridding our houses of chametz. And there are many ways to think about this journey. I just wanted to mention a few of them that will come up in Exodus 12, the special reading for Shabbat HaChodesh. First of all, there's physical freedom, the release from oppression. We contend with the need for physical freedom still to this day. There are actually more slaves in the world than ever before because obviously the population has also exploded, and we can do a lot to help. Of course, we talk about political freedom. Pharaoh was a great tyrant, and in the Haggadah, the text for the Passover Seder, the oppression of Rome is referenced. Today, many people are anticipating putting a sunflower on their Seder plate because Vladimir Putin is a modern-day Pharaoh. We still yearn for political freedom everywhere, and especially these days in Ukraine. There's spiritual freedoms. One of the main points of the Haggadah is to highlight the inalienable spiritual freedom that comes from knowing there is a God and you are created in the image of that God. There's inner freedom. That's why and how we do the meditation that we do, is to expand that inner freedom. There's a whole literature around the inner Pharaoh within, but also we can deploy our inner Miriam and her timbrel and our inner Moses and his staff. And we'll be doing some work on inner freedom today. And in Exodus 12, the main focus is initiative is freedom, the power of choice to choose freedom itself as an expression of having been created in God's image. Now, you may be thinking of other kinds of freedom. The layers of freedom are different in every life and in every season. But these are some of the freedoms that you might want to bring to mind as we're ushering in the month of Nisan. Exodus 12 specifically teaches about two things that I want to highlight. First, the principle that we have to celebrate freedom before it happens, if it's going to really happen at all. It's only a taskmaster who would say, you must have perfect freedom before you can celebrate it. By celebrating what freedom we have, we actually expand and increase it. And then secondly, while freedom is a birthright, it will require action and risk and sacrifice from all of us and from each of us. Now, I've been referencing Exodus 12, which we'll look at in a moment. This is a transitional moment because until now, all the signs and wonders have been evident for all of Egypt to see. But now God is speaking more intimately to the Jewish people. And I just want to share with you a beautiful poem by David White that you may know that applies, I think, to this moment of Shabbat HaChodesh and Exodus 12. Sometimes everything has to be inscribed across the heavens so that you can find the one line already written inside you. Sometimes it takes a great sky to find that first bright and indescribable wedge of freedom in your own heart. We're going from the big signs and wonders to that intimate moment. And of course, that image of the wedge of freedom reminds us of that first wedge, that first slice of the new moon. Here's the text itself. It begins by saying, Adonai said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt. This is important because we think of Torah as being given at Sinai or subsequently in the desert. But this particular command is given to the entire Jewish people in the land of Egypt after the plague of darkness and before the final plague of the killing of the firstborn. So just with beginner's mind, let's imagine if you were going to speak to the Jewish people in that moment, what would you say? I personally would say, run. Or maybe I would imagine that Deuteronomy 6 would appear here, some reassurance, Hear, O Israel, Adonai is your God, Adonai is one. Some kind of affirmation of bitachon, as Mark was speaking about before. But we get this. This month is for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first of months of the year for you. So at this dire moment, let's all synchronize our watches. And this is about, I think, two things. First, free people control their calendars. One of the marks of enslavement is that your time is not your own. So by Moses coming forward and saying, this month shall be for you, the first of months, it's a way of saying your freedom is promised, your freedom is coming. Even before it's here, it's celebrated and announced. And then also commentators have pointed out that the words in green on your screen, for you, lachem, repeated twice, are really unnecessary to the verse. And they seem to convey that this is personal. This is for you to claim, for you to take an active role in. And in fact, the new month is announced by people witnessing the sliver in the sky. Now, who is this you? Lachem is a plural, but we see in the subsequent verses that there are lots of different people addressed here. It's for you, the entire community of Israel, the whole polity. It's for you, a family unit within a tribe. It's for you, the household. It's even for you, hu ushcheno, one person and one neighbor, to share this Paschal offering and to celebrate freedom and eat together, not on the anniversary of the Exodus, but before the Exodus even happened. And importantly, it's not just a meal or a celebration, but it's a risk. They'll take some of the blood and put it on the doorpost to mark themselves as rebels before Pharaoh, as well as marking their houses for safety from the point of view of God. And they will be active in eating the symbol of their enslavement and bitterness. And more than that, they will have loins girded and sandals on feet and staff in hand and eat it with a sense of urgency. You can imagine sort of a forward posture because they are taking an active role. Until now, all the plagues came upon them, sometimes literally like locusts. But this is the first time that the Israelites are taking an active role. And yes, God will step in and God will rescue and do what they can't do, but they also will do what they can and must. Adin Steinsaltz has a beautiful teaching about what it means to be free from his book On Being Free. And he says, slavery is that condition in which a person is always subject to the will of another. Seems simple enough. Freedom, on the other hand, is the ability to act upon and carry out one's own independent will, meaning put your mark on the doorpost, declare it to be a month. Between ceasing to be a slave and acquiring freedom, the individual must pass through an intermediate stage of progress without which he cannot become truly free. He must develop inner qualities. This is lachem. Each of us has to do this for ourselves. There is a group project of freedom, but there's also an inner work of freedom. We must bring ourselves to understand ever more deeply that we shall truly be redeemed only when we take it upon ourselves to fulfill our need to live in our own unique way. That is when we will become truly free. So with that, I want to invite us into meditation, because each of us does indeed have a unique journey to freedom. And with this meditation, we'll hopefully embody some of the messages of Exodus 12 and Shabbat HaChodesh. I invite you to take a deep breath, and on an exhale, soften your gaze or close your eyes. In your chair, find a position that supports you. Take a few more deep breaths. And as you breathe in, notice expansion. Imagine that with each inhalation, you're taking in the freedom of expansiveness. Every time you inhale, the rib cage easily and naturally expands. The belly automatically expands. The chest lifts and expands. Each time, more expansiveness, greater sense of ease and freedom. And as you focus within, maybe you can sense a vast expanse of your inner world, the place of your greatest freedom. As you continue to notice the expansiveness of inhalation, notice the release of exhalation, another kind of freedom. As you exhale, you can let go of tension, of what constricts and binds. As you inhale, you make space and room. Breathe in spaciousness. Breathe out release. Even if your mind goes elsewhere, your body continues to breathe in spaciousness and to breathe out release. So as you breathe in and out, I invite you to anticipate future freedom. Think of a small change that could happen between now and Passover that would increase freedom in your world. What might be different in the material world, physically, politically? What might be different in the spiritual world, in your inner awareness? How might your calendar and your relationship to time be different? In some small way, imagine an increase of freedom that could happen in the near future, whatever comes to mind. And just breathe in spaciousness and breathe out release. What initiative might you take before Passover to bring just a bit more freedom? And if you notice an inner taskmaster starting to give you orders about any of this, just release the taskmaster. There's no assignment, only vision and hope and freedom. What is some initiative, some small shift you could take to bring a bit more freedom? Keep breathing in expansion and breathing out release. And who might be a partner or for you in bringing just a bit more freedom? What member of the household, what extended family or tribe, what people? You don't have to do this alone. As any partners come to mind, just bless them with freedom, expansiveness, and release. The ancient Israelites had their supplies, their walking stick, their matzah. What do you need, literally or symbolically, to carry with you to increase your freedom? And if you want to grant or gift supplies to any of your partners in freedom, send them that blessing now. In ancient Israel, freedom had an upright posture. At the Seder, we lean on pillows. Assume now in your chair a position that displays your freedom just for yourself, to yourself. Might be a small inner shift. You might totally move or bend or lean or straighten. What is a posture of freedom for you? Three more breaths. Breathe in spaciousness. Breathe out release. From your posture of freedom. In for spaciousness. And letting go, release. whenever you're ready, you can gently rub your hands together and open your eyes.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Deborah. This is just a beautiful meditation on tasting freedom, even as we're just approaching the month of Nisan. That was really a special experience. You had me with the image, first of all, of that sliver of moon and that David Whyte poem, which that alone was worth the price of admission, right? That wedge of light that represents the first sliver of freedom. I want to invite you to expand a little bit on this idea of celebrating freedom before it arrives. The question about experiencing freedom as part of the process, an ongoing process, as opposed to a destination, like, a place we're getting, right? And I think Judaism holds that paradox that in some sense it's linear, but it's also not linear at all in that sense.
Yes, well said. Well, I think the moment of the crossing, if there is a linear timeline to freedom, that is perceived as this great moment of freedom, a destination that they got to. But even that moment has the quality of a process, because we're aware that Miriam and the women needed to pack those timbrels back when they were enslaved. That had to be part of their consciousness of bringing those things along. And there's even Midrash that says when they sing together, Ze'eli, Anu V'Amru, they all sang together, "This is my God," because they'd been practicing it throughout their years of enslavement. And I think we actually know this in our own time, because we know that Negro spirituals were sung as freedom songs while people were enslaved. So the hope of freedom has to be nourished before freedom arrives. Otherwise, it's hopeless. There is no such thing as getting there without claiming it now in some vision, if not yet fully in reality. And it's so inspirational also to see in real time Ukrainians doing this. Talk about putting the blood on the lintel, taking a risk, marking yourself, all those things. And we see that they're not just taking the initiative of their freedom, but they have this vision. We are free. It's going to play out. There will be suffering in between, but their vision is this strong vision of, we are a free, independent country.
It really is inspiring, and it makes me think about really, as we say, lahavdil, we can distinguish between these really such awesomely courageous actions by Ukrainians and others, and the small, seemingly mundane acts of resistance that we can practice in our daily actions by refusing to conform to beliefs or norms that may seem, primary, by marking our own doorposts in some way, by asserting our own identity, by relying on our truth. And I was thinking, as you were leading the meditation, even in the freedom of choice that we have to let ourselves be, distracted and drawn away, or to make the choice to come back to the intention and to be present, which is a choice which is there in every moment.
Right.
Thank you for inviting me back, because I unfortunately kept making the choice to keep coming back because it was so compelling and so beautiful to listen in your guidance. Do you have insights to share about the connection of the blood on the lintel and the mezuzah on the doorpost?
Interesting, isn't it? Well, I think in Passover, there's a lot of those positive and negative symbols that go together, that the matzah is simultaneously the bread of freedom and the bread of affliction, that the egg is both rebirth and it's doused in salt water. And there's so many dualities in these images. And I think that's another one that we can hold together, both of those at the same time. One of my favorites that I'll just point out is a very subtle one. It's embedded in the Haggadah. There's a section of the Haggadah that talks about the plagues, where the plagues are multiplied. The rabbis want to multiply the plagues because it's stated in the Torah that anything that happened to Egypt will never happen to us. So therefore, the more plagues, the better. And they keep, no, there weren't 10 plagues, there were actually 50. No, there were actually 250, and so on. If you add up the total number of plagues that everyone says there might have been, there are 613 plagues, which is a remarkable message to let you know that in every moment you have a choice, a plague or a mitzvah, a plague or a mitzvah.
So, it's like from Deuteronomy, right? Life and death, blessing and curse. The freedom is in that choice, which they did not have in enslavement. Deborah, I also really appreciated you sharing. You have such fantastic resources about Passover. I wonder if you want to maybe talk a little bit about your work with human trafficking, because I think that's, it's a way of really, of course, bringing the story to life and making it quite immediate and reminding us that we're not talking about history here. We're talking, past history, at least we're talking about reality.
Well, I want to acknowledge something you said before about how there are different layers, and we were tempted to say lahavdil, this may seem small. So I don't want to say that anybody's claim of freedom is small, no matter what it is. If it's claiming freedom over your own mind and heart, freedom within your household, whatever it is, freedom on your job, the personal freedoms that we exercise are not insignificant. They're very meaningful too. Mm-hmm. But when I think of sitting down to a Passover Seder and not acknowledging that there are people enslaved right now today, it breaks my heart. How can we talk about, I feel enslaved by my iPhone or whatever, when there are people really and truly toiling in slavery? And what's beautiful about this problem is that there's a lot we can do to solve it. In fact, 197 countries, the Catholic Church, the conservative movement of Judaism, have all signed on to end human trafficking by the year 2030. It's doable. And it takes some small shifts from us in our purchasing. It takes some tzedakah, hopefully, that people will be moved to give. And it takes most of all awareness that we can all achieve at our Seders. So I hope people will do that. It's a great passion of mine. Thank you, Mark, for bringing it up.
Just to stay with this issue about, our comparative thinking about, well, how do I talk about freedom in this way, freedom from habits, when there's like you said, literal, people are literally enslaved and trafficked and sold as chattel. And we can and need to focus on that. And what we're doing here, sitting, for half an hour every day, meditating and using this as a kind of gym to notice our capacity to grow in freedom and to sensitize ourselves to that dynamic that you're describing between being constricted and closed down and unfree. I won't use the word enslaved there, just like challenged in our freedom by the force of habit and reaction, which we see all the time playing out in our world, and cultivating our capacity to notice the possibility of freedom and to see what it feels like to act freely. If I'm left to my own devices, I'm just going to either fall asleep or get distracted or, let myself daydream and do that. Surrender to habit, give free rein to my reactions. But every time I wake up and make a choice to come back to the intention to be present and to show up, even if it feels unpleasant, it sensitizes me to that issue that you've lifted up today about freedom, sensitizes me to the reality that other people may not be experiencing that kind of freedom and that I have a responsibility. The other thing about Passover, maybe you want to say a word about this too, is that it is definitely not the end of the story. And the Omer makes the direct connection between freedom and responsibility to use that freedom in service to something, to a higher power, to greater purpose, to God, and to spread freedom to others who don't have it.
I think it is part of the journey and not the whole journey, but also more embedded than we're usually at first aware of. It does talk about that extra layer of responsibility and that next step. It pushes us. And I think when I talked about in the very first slide, I gave a nod to the debate between Rav and Shmuel about what is the freedom? Is the freedom that we're physically free, or is the freedom that we're spiritually free? And the Jewish answer is yes, of course. It's both, and both are operative. And we can't discount our own spiritual freedom as insignificant, because it's not just the tool that we use to liberate other people. It's not just mechanistic or a means. There's a value to it. It's an end in itself. And anybody who's ever suffered internally, feeling really constricted, either because of an addiction or a habit of mind or a self-flagellation, Pharaoh-like inside, that's not a small thing. That also needs healing. It's not an either or. And so I don't want to put that down or make that unimportant. I think it's very important. But I would say, with your observation that Passover is part of the story, it kind of a little bit maps onto the philosophical difference between freedom from and freedom to. That Passover is mostly focused on freedom from, being redeemed, being spared, being taken out, all those, verbs that we use, the 4 famous verbs, of which there are really 5 in the verse, but okay, the 4/5 verbs. And then on the other hand, Shavuot, which is freedom to, that we get to a level where we can now use and exercise our freedom to love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So that now we're not just recovering or healing ourselves, we're helping to heal the world.
That is really beautifully put. And I saw in the chat, just to underscore, the substitution of and for either or is another, just another flavor, another aspect of the freedom that you're talking about, that our usual go-to in general is this binary or dualistic way of, well, it must be this or must be that. And that the Jewish answer so often is, and that the Talmud just represents this idea of holding multiple truths at the same time as part of the one, is so powerful, and part of the freedom that I think you're describing beautifully today. Thank you so much, as always, for leading us so beautifully today. And thanks again, Deborah, for a beautiful set today.
Thank you. Freedom to everyone.